should assisted dying be a human right? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome Rabbi Jonathan Romain from Religious Alliance for Dignity in Dying and Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern, Tim Dieppe. If I could start with you, Rabbi Romain, welcome to GB News and Mark Dolan tonight. Why do you support assisted death?
Well, I didn't always, I have to tell you, and I sort of changed my mind as a congregational minister for two reasons. Firstly, because I spent an awful lot of time visiting people in hospitals, hospices, and utter admiration for all the work that people do to care for those who are dying. But I saw just too many people who were terminally ill and who were dying in pain, despite the best efforts of the nurses and despite the care of their family, and who just wanted to die. And time again, people would say to me, every night I pray that I won't wake up. And when I do in the morning, I'm just devastated. And I thought, well, if people are terminally ill, they're dying anyway, and they're in great pain, why should we force them to suffer on when there might be a suitable medical way out? Plus, and the other factor that changed my mind is the safeguards. Now, there are other countries in the world, and there were some of them in the Pre-Leave programme, where they have sort of rather wide admission criteria. But in the situation being proposed for Britain is very strict, very tight. You have to be terminally ill. You have to be monitored by 2 independent doctors. You have to sign the document saying you're aware of what's going on. You have ultimate choice throughout the time, and you have to be offered alternatives such as palliative care. And it just seemed to me that the safeguards we're offering in Britain, as opposed to elsewhere, are really strong and reassured me that for those who want to have an assisted death, and by the way, a lot of people will carry on to their last breath, and great for them, and we should give them every support. But for those who really are suffering, and who just want to let go and say, thank you, God, I've had a great life, but I don't want to carry on in this dreadful pain, then why shouldn't we let them do so? It seems to me not just more humane, more religious. There's nothing sacred about suffering. There's nothing holy about agony. And if those people want to let go, then they should be allowed to do so.
Tim Dieppe, also great to have you on the show, Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern. As a man of faith yourself, why would God want people to suffer if they don't need to?
He doesn't want people to suffer. He doesn't like people suffering. But my position is that we shouldn't legalise assisted suicide because it's unnecessary, because we can actually provide good treatments and good care for people in palliative care. And my wife died last year with very excellent palliative care, and that's what everyone should have. And secondly, because it's dangerous, because it puts vulnerable people at risk. And because of that, every major disability organisation in the UK is opposed to a change in the law because they're concerned that perceptions against disabled people would only increase, and the sense of them being a burden, the sense of a duty to die would only increase in that kind of way, as well as changing fundamentally the relationship between doctors and patients. And finally, because it's wrong. In fact, it's contrary to all historical codes of ethics, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Sikh, Buddhist, Hindu, and of course the Hippocratic Oath as well. And so I think it would be a very dangerous thing to do to legalise assisted suicide in this country, and I'm glad we don't have it legalised today.
Jonathan Romain, as a highly respected faith leader yourself, have you had pushback from others in this regard? Surely it's the will of God as to when people die, not a medic.
Well, there's certainly some people who oppose, and I accept that people have reasons against, but I think the reasons for are so much stronger. And by the way, when you say it's the will of God, that's not really a good argument, because if it was the will of God, if we saw someone with a heart attack, we wouldn't say, oh yes, let him die, it's the will of God. We would come to their aid. Or we do things such as give blood transplants. We even give people new limbs, all sorts of transplants. So we intervene. We actually don't accept the will of God, and we try and keep people alive out of care, out of compassion. And so for the same two reasons, care and compassion, as I say, only for those in assisted dying and who, by the way, are mentally competent, and therefore we know that that's what they want. And by the way, I would also say that although there are religious leaders against, there are many religious leaders in favour. So it's not really a religious issue. It's a matter of almost principle. Do you insist that your view trumps everybody else, or do you give people a choice? So, Tim, it may be that for you and for your wife, and I'm sorry to hear about that, assisted dying is not right, okay, I accept that fully. But then you shouldn't stop other people having that ability if that's what they so choose. I think that sort of lacks compassion for those people who are suffering, and it's not a very Christian approach, to be honest, because if people want to let go, I think they should be allowed to do so in these strictly regulated circumstances.
Tim, I would like to share Jonathan's comments and condolences to you on the very, very sad loss of your wife last year. How would you respond to what Jonathan has just said?
Yes, I think we should have compassion and care for all people who are suffering and do the very best we can. But my concern is if we actually legalise that, that will actually change the relationship between doctors and patients so that people get less care. An experience, for example, related by Dr. Catherine Mannix, a palliative care consultant, who had a patient who had been in the Netherlands who recovered from a cancer operation and was in some pain and discomfort. And every day the doctors would come around, how are you today? And he would say, well, I'm not very well. I'm suffering. I'm in discomfort. I'm in pain. And doctors say, well, I don't think there's anything we can do, but we can offer you euthanasia. Every day they offered him euthanasia till finally he was able to come to a hospital in the UK under the NHS, under this doctor. And the doctors then, instead of saying we're offering euthanasia, found a way, like innovatively looked into it, found a way to relieve his discomfort and looked after him and made him well and good to live. And so the point is that it changes the way the doctors think about how they care for people. They think, oh, well, we can offer you euthanasia, rather than thinking about how we can actually look after this person and alleviate their care. And I think it's very, very concerning to legislate in order to enable this because of the slippery slope that it would do in terms of the damage to the relationship between doctors and patients and the way that vulnerable people would feel under pressure to end their lives.
Jonathan, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I'd like to correct two things, if I may. Firstly, terms. It's really important to be accurate about terms. Euthanasia is when somebody else takes your life. A suicide is when you end your own life, but if you hadn't done that, say you're depressed at 40, you could have gone on living for another 30 years. Assisted dying is different from both euthanasia and a suicide, because assisted dying is when you actually take the medication yourself. And it is only when you are terminally ill. So you're not killing somebody, they are taking their own life shortly before they die anyway. And the other thing is about changing relationships. Well, I think the other thing that really persuaded me that this is the right course to go down is what's happened in Oregon. Now, Oregon was one of the first places to allow assisted dying. It has a very, very similar protocols as we're proposing in Britain, and it did it 25 years ago. In other words, we have got the sort of the hindsight of a quarter of a century, and they haven't changed anything. It's not a slippery slope. A lot of people apply for permission, but they don't actually go through with it because because the life force is so strong. But it's an enormous sort of emotional safety net to know that if things get really, really horrible and absolutely pear-shaped, then they can get that prescription. And it's a great comfort to people who never take it but have that option.
Tim Dieppe, it is all about options, isn't it? I mean, what about people who are mindful of their own dignity? They just don't want to have a long, protracted and painful death. Perhaps there are medications that won't, remove all of the pain. What if there are issues around cognition? They can't remember or recognise members of their family. And what about those who don't want to be a burden on their family anymore? Surely they have a choice.
I think all of these things are very, very concerning, and I think that people should have absolutely the best care and the best looking after and the best attention to both medical, physical and mental health for every single person there. And I think it's very concerning. So a lot of people actually change their minds about this. Again, another case that Dr. Mannix relates is of a former head teacher suffering from motor neuron disease who felt, could see the prognosis, realised they weren't going to be able to do things and be as active and take care of themselves and couldn't face that. Said, I want to die. I was very upset about the law. I'd say, why won't you let me die? I want to be able to die. And then when experiencing the care and actually the love and actually all of the concern, all the medical concern that he had and the way he was looked after, he then said much later on, after, shortly before his death, I'm so glad that wasn't an option for me because I would have taken it and then I wouldn't have experienced these many last months. I wouldn't have had Christmas with my family and all that, because so many people change their minds when they experience the actual care and love they have. Why do we say we should let you go? Why do we say, like Danny Kruger, what do we say to somebody who's wanting to jump off a bridge? We say, please don't do it, right? right? Why should we say it to someone else who's depressed and upset? Yes, we'll let you carry on. Yeah, go ahead, lose your life. We don't really care about your life. We don't really want to look after you. What kind of message does that send to people in society? I think it's a very concerning message that we're sending to people, that we don't really value people just because they're suffering, just because we're not very happy about life.
An important and complex...
Point about the man on the bridge. Let me pick up the point about the man on the bridge, or the woman on the bridge. Usually that's someone who's reasonably able and fit, and able to get to that position in the first place. And we know jolly well that they are gone through an emotional trauma or a financial disaster or whatever, and that they would live if actually they didn't jump. That's the whole difference. We're not killing off people who've got a long life and have a potentially happy life. We're talking about somebody who is dying anyway.
The difficulty is that actually the prognosis, the prognosis of doctors having notoriously unreliable in terms of the length of time that people have to live. And the example in Canada as well is very, very concerning. You've got people there like a Paralympic veteran who wanted a ramp in their house, and when they're phoning up the people to help said, oh, well, we could always give you euthanasia.
Okay.
You know, these kind of cases are absolutely shocking and disturbing, and we don't want that to be happening.
We will have to leave it there. Apologies to both, but the clock's against us. My deep thanks to Rabbi Jonathan Romain from Religious Alliance for Dignity in Dying and Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern Tim Dieppe for a fascinating debate.